I'm very curious to know, and this is a question for Joaquin as well, because you guys, I think you were in the same workshop when you started bringing these poems in. I'm so curious to know how your workshop responded to them.
uh,
Cal Poly is a translator, poet, and teacher from St. Paul, Minnesota. Their work has appeared in the Paris Review, Waxwing, Reading and Translation, Asymptote, and elsewhere. They are an MFA candidate in literary translation at the University of Arkansas, where they are the comics editor at the Arkansas International and teach gender studies. Black Box, named Like to Me by Diana Garza Islas, is Cal's first full-length translation, Deanna's first book, and Deanna's first book to be translated into English. It will be released later this year from Ugly Duckling Press. In this video, I'm joined by a co-host for the first time. Joaquin Gavilano is also a literary translation student in the Arkansas MFA, is Cal's longtime colleague, and my husband.
How did you get your start in translation?
it's a good question. I was working on just like maintaining my Spanish basically in undergrad. And I was also doing a creative writing major, so it just kind of intersected neatly. And there was a semester where a translation workshop was offered, and I was like, sure, this seems like fun. I could probably do that, right? And then just like poured hours and hours into it that were not required, you know? Like it was just so much fun. It was just so much fun. And so unlike the rest of the work I was doing. And yeah, I just like totally fell in love with it and decided to keep doing it.
What brought you to the Arkansas MFA?
Yeah. I was looking for programs that were on the longer end, right? So this one's 4 years. So that sounded really good to me. And I was also looking for programs that encourage like cross-disciplinary work. I feel very strongly that I'm both a poet and a translator. So it was important to me that I be allowed to take like both types of classes over the course of the degree. And this is like literally the best place for that, basically, as far as I know. There were a few other programs I applied to, but this is actually the only one where I got in, is the other thing. So
I mean, that's a pretty big reason to go somewhere.
yeah, that too. Yeah. It was genuinely my first choice. So I was very happy. It
It's
worked out.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like, I don't know, when it comes to translation, do you feel like that impacts a lot of your like original work? You say you're like a poet. So how has translation affected the way you work through your own stuff, your own writing?
Yeah. I think because I've really translated just like a really narrow frame of work at this point, like it's just this book, basically. Like I'm playing with some other things now, but that's the first time in like the entire time that I've been translating that I'm doing that. So I think most of the experience that I have comes from working with Diana's poems. And they're so weird and snarly and uh difficult in some ways, but also just like really playful. Um, and I think that that has really opened my mind up to like what is even possible in a poem, right?
Right.
Like what is even reasonable, doable. Uh,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure that anybody was gonna like these translated poems, um, or be interested in them. There was a genuine possibility that it was just gonna be just me doing it just for me, and
Hmm.
that would have been fine. But as it turns out, there is actually an audience for like as weird as it gets poetry. Uh, so so I think I've like turned into a little bit more of a confident poet in some ways, and just like trusting that if I'm into it, I am not so special as to think that no one else will be. There are
Right.
people out there that will probably be into it as well. And also, I think it's just like asked me to think about syntax and um, image and be more specific and imaginative with those things, and to really just like not worry about it being realistic all the time, kind of thing. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's been good stuff.
You may have answered this, but was there any other project that you had been working on in translation before this one?
No, no,
No. Oh wow.
nothing. Like I had translated an Octavio Paz
Sure.
for that workshop as practice, but we had all done that. It was like this is sort of what translation is or whatever.
What a challenging and intimidate like I it's a really difficult project and you handled it so well considering like it being your first project is just wild to me and that you're getting it published. Congratulations. I can't say more than that.
It's nuts. I I cannot stress enough how unseriously I was taking it for the first 2 years in its entirety. Like it was fascinating and it was so much fun, but I had no experience. I had no basis from which to like be translating, to think about I was just doing it. I was just doing it. It was
Yeah.
just fun. It was weird. It was sort of meditative. Right? Like when you really get in the zone and you just go for like 3 hours or something. That's a weird, cool headspace to be in. And her poems are weird to begin with. Yeah, it was just like I just kept doing it because I liked it, and then eventually I got like shoved, nudged, and
Yeah.
emailed her, and then here we are. That's really what it feels like. It really just feels like I was doing a thing, and then somebody told me I should take it a little bit more seriously, and now it's a book. I don't know.
It's wild how much a little bit of validation can do in this industry.
That's
Because
true.
similarly, I had no idea what I was going to do coming into a translation MFA and having someone tell me like, oh, you should apply to this, or you should submit here and like being like, okay, sure. And it working out is, I don't know, it really shows how everything in this industry is like someone believing in someone else. And it's just a chain of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm very curious to know, and this is a question for Joaquin as well, because you guys, I think you were in the same workshop when you started bringing these poems in. I'm so curious to know how your workshop responded to them.
uh, s- this is just okay. And let's everyone who is in workshop now, everyone who's a translation track person, everyone's been great. I would say that the first workshop that I brought these to was not great about it and did not understand it or want to try to understand it. um, they ask a lot, and uh, and I also wasn't in a place where I could like bridge. Um, I was still figuring out exactly what these poems wanted from me as a translator and from a reader. So I think initially it was really rough going. It was like, oh, there is just nothing you can say that's going to explain this. And I was like totally convinced that I shouldn't be trying, that like that's not the point of these poems. Why would I have to try and like help anybody figure it out? They'll just figure it out. Which turns out to not really be the case. Um,
Yeah. No,
yeah,
that's rough, particularly it being your first workshop, right?
it's fine.
Um,
Fine.
it was for me when I first encountered, like I remember that first time you were being workshopped, and I think it was like 2 days before the workshop, and I was like, okay, it's time to read for workshop, and I pulled out a couple of the poems. I started reading them kind of mindlessly because sometimes I do that, and like the
Yeah.
first, you know, I usually have to reread the first thing a couple times to kind of get into it. But then I found myself rereading it like 10 times. And I was like, wait, like it was shocking. I kept telling Hiba like I was really curious, I guess, about everything. And in that workshop we weren't able to provide context for our projects.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. She didn't want us providing context, which made me very sad. But
That this book needs a little bit of context to throw it at that group of people.
yeah.
And I toyed with ideas like so I was like, is this author, because you provided the source, I believe, as well. I was just kind of like, is this person actually speaking Spanish? Like,
Yeah.
is this some sort of fake Spanish? And I guess it kind of is in a way, but not
Yeah.
really. Like, it actually is like, I was just very confused about the whole thing. But it was interesting, and I feel like the more I got into it, the more it made sense progressively. But yeah, to the point where it is now, and it's just something I really admire as someone who's been able to see it grow over time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it was rough going, the first workshop, especially. Um, I think somebody actually told me to not, told me to like stop, like go find something else to translate, you know?
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah, it's okay. I didn't, obviously, and it wasn't ever a possibility really in my mind that I would. But if you're watching this and you're a translator, uh, yeah, trust your gut, you know?
So it sounds like it was a project several years in the making. Did your relationship to it change in that time at any point?
Enormously. Yeah. Several times. Yeah. I went into the project thinking I would just translate one poem. And even that was like a big ask in some ways because they're all really long, right? And then I was like, oh, I'll just do a couple because they're so interesting and I need a end of semester project or whatever. And then it was like, oh, I need a capstone for this major. I could just like keep going for a little bit, do like 30 pages or something. And then Um, and then at that point, my advisor was like, here's her email. I found her email for you. You should just really, you should do the whole book, dummy. And he was right. Yeah. How did what question was this? Sorry.
And it was a random question that wasn't on the list, but it was inspired by the fact that you have been doing this project for multiple years.
Right. It changed. Yes. Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it changed when I started it, or it changed right after I started it. It changed again when it became my capstone. It changed again when Sergio Gutierrez Negron was like, you need to keep going. You're graduated, but you need to keep going. I'm charging you with this task. And then when I decided to go to grad school, sort of shifted again into like, okay, it's like I'm actually going to be serious about this and really, really push through to the end. And then I got really insecure about it when that workshop happened and I was really nervous and maybe everybody hates it and then it got picked up.
So inspiring because I didn't even realize that you were working on it before grad school. That's incredible.
It's 7 years.
Wow.
It will be 7 years of my life when it comes out in December.
Wow.
That's
So
wild.
what was it about that book that initially drew you in?
Weird. It was strange. It was unlike anything I'd read in Spanish or English before. It didn't care about me. Yeah, for whatever reason at the time, I was just really interested in that kind of pushiness or indifference and in intense experimentation. I'd been looking through like small presses, mostly in Mexico, at their websites and the things that they publish and excerpts and stuff. And I was reading a lot of poetry that was like pretty realist based, pretty sense making, pretty like about relationships and love and topics that I love reading poems about. But at the time I was just like not into it. And I was like, if I'm going to do this thing, which is an enormous amount of work, I had better be interested in whatever it's going to be, right? And I stumbled across Deanna's book, and the whole PDF was on the internet for some horrible reason. So I just got to look through it and read through it. And yeah, and it was just like, yeah, I'll do this. I don't know. Kind of sort of like love at first sight, I guess. Semi love at first sight.
So, for people who don't have much knowledge of the industry, could you talk a bit about how one typically gets started with a translation project and maybe like what the essential components are of a successful author slash translator relationship?
Yeah, I will do my best. Again, I still feel very green about all of this. So I will let you know what my experience has been like. That's what I got. The picking a piece to translate. I think this comes from knowing my tastes pretty well and like being willing to trust my gut about my tastes. And then just like reading really widely, like just reading as much as I can that's even vaguely in the genre or in the uh like style of what I'm interested in. If I don't Pretty similarly to sorry, to writing generally, right? If you're not enjoying what you're writing, generally it's pretty obvious and like not enjoyable to read. I think this is true of translating as well, right? Like if you're gonna put that much labor into it, you better love it. You better love it. Or at least that's how I do things. Yeah, so I mean I the small press website in languages that you're trying to translate from TIP was a big, really good one. That made it a lot easier and a lot less overwhelming to try to sort through Google search pages or whatever. Yeah, just like looking at small presses and or journals that are publishing in the language that you're wanting to translate from. And I think I've come around on the idea that if you have somebody who knows the language really, really well, if you want to translate from it, but you don't feel super confident in your ability, as long as you're working closely with somebody who really knows it, I think it's reasonable to like just be and to just do it casually. Like that's the other thing. Not all things need to get published or whatever, right? Like you can just be translating things and learn a language that way. Okay, so there's that part. And then the industry thing, what was this is a double header question. What was the
Yeah,
second?
sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
I asked what the essential components are of a successful
Yeah.
like, author-translator relationship.
Trust, and you can't fake that. Communication, just like lots of that wherever, like as much as possible, basically. My understanding is that you're going to run into like really different relationships with each author you work with if they're alive, right? I've only worked really intensively with Deanna, and so like our relationship is what I'll speak to here, I guess. I've never met her in person. We have worked almost exclusively via email, and that's been really, really, really lovely. Her emails are like very sweet and genuine, and I don't feel like I have to spell everything right every time, when I send her an email, and that's really nice. It's I think it's like any friendship or relationship of trust, right? Like you're gonna run into snags, differences of opinion on like one thing or another thing, but just like figuring out where your boundaries as a translator are and that author figuring out where their boundaries are, and then like doing your best to respect those, right? Check in, see how things are going. I got very lucky, I think, in getting to work with Deanna because she trusts me enormously, but she's also very particular about certain things, right? So she knows what she wants about this thing, and then the rest of it is up to me. Like, which works. I think it works. I think that works really well for me. Yeah, trust, communication. That's yeah, I think that's most of it right there.
Can I ask a question that I just kind of thought of? I don't know if you'll be able to talk too much about it, but you said in response to the relationship with the author, you kind of cleared the if they're alive. So you've also translated stuff from authors who are no longer alive. Sorry?
As of very recently, but yes.
Yes. But I'm curious to see if you feel like there is some form of relationship with this entity, even though they're not alive presently.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Yeah, I think there is. Um, the authors I'm working with who are dead are also almost exclusively anonymous, because I'm working with these really old manuscripts right now, with stuff in the record that just doesn't have names to it. I've been working with Old and Middle Irish lately, which is really cool and fun and hard. But they just didn't think about a poem as being by an author, like a single author. That just didn't occur to them as something that was worth writing down. um, so, so, really, really so much about an author is hidden from you when you're working with that, right? I've been trying to supplement with scholarship on it, with just reading more widely the language, with looking at the manuscript record, and seeing what we have in terms of the like hard copy. You can tell a lot about something based on what the hard copy looks like. But in that context, I think one of the things you just have to get really, really comfortable with, is just not knowing, and not being able to know, which is, I would say, also true of working with living authors. Often, like, I've raised questions to Deanna about something, and she's like, I had no idea that was even like even a tiny bit a part of this, right? Or I don't know, I wasn't thinking about, right? Like, there's a lot of I don't knows. There's always going to be a lot of I don't knows. And working with authors and with texts that are really, really, really old, I think it just like puts that front and center and asks you how you're going to deal with it. How are you going to deal with it? And I think it just depends on the project, it seems like. I don't
Yeah.
know.
No, that's a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, and you might not want to answer this, and that's totally fine, but you mentioned that there were points where you ran into some snags with Deanna.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I'm so curious to know what those were and how you worked through them because this project feels so unique that I'm kind of surprised that
Yeah. I mean, it's like any big thing where you're working with other people. There's always going to be something that comes up, you know. I think yeah, I think she wouldn't mind us talking about this. It just like, you know, with a text that keeps the reader at such a distance, and like makes it clear that it doesn't want to explain things to you. But my job as a translator is to sort of make it accessible to an English reader. That's just like there's a little bit of a paradoxical task to have, right? A little bit of a hard job to have as a translator. So I would find myself at times trying to clarify things or to make things like easier or nicer to read. Especially one of my semesters in grad school here, I had a professor who was thinking really hard about how to make language like put it in English, right? Like make it work in English the way that it's working in Spanish, right? And like that's really cool, and I think there's value in that. And I think that this project does not want to sit nicely in any language. And so it was like, I was trying to do something that the book didn't want, right? And Deanna knew that, luckily, right? And could be like, no, not that. Less commas. You're putting in commas where there need not be commas. In fact, there should not be commas. Take them out. And I had to be like, okay, yeah, right. And there were some things that I would be like, okay, but there's this reason and this reason for it. And she'd be like, okay, this one's fine. But this one really needs to go, you know? That's just how that goes. Like, I'm trying to think of anything else that can. Yeah, there was a point where I was thinking of adding like an endnotes section to like trace some of the references I was seeing in the book, but like explicitly so that people could follow along without having to like dig for them themselves. Places where I was like a note section where maybe I would try to describe like an interpretation or an analysis of one of the poems, to just like show somebody how it's possible to really delve into one of them. And Deanna was like, nah. And I was like, okay, but it's cool and fun to nerd out in the back of the book where people can look at it if they want to, but they don't have to. And she was like, too much explaining. Get that out of here. Which, you know, it's fine. Like, it's okay. Yeah, and then honestly, the moments where we hit the most snags, I think, was when the book itself, when we were trying to put it into the material world as a book with a design, with like images or not images, what the cover's going to look like, where things sit on the page. And that isn't so much just a me and Deanna question, but also like all the editors and the typesetters. And that part of it is just involves so many more people and moving parts that there was just like a lot of back and forth about a lot of things. There was a whole like dashes couple of weeks where we're just thinking about dashes and in emails flying back and forth about dashes and the formatting. So anyways, and I'm laughing because it's a little bit funny. And it's all good. Like, we're good. You know, I'm really happy with how it's turned out, and so is she. But there's always going to be things to work through if you are trusting your gut and like saying what you need to say, and so is the author, I think.
That sounds so ideal, but it makes me question. It does make me question who came up with the FAQ section.
That was me.
Tell me more about that section.
Yeah, for sure. I was trying to figure out how to write a translator's note to this book. I've written much shorter ones to introduce like individual poems in journals and stuff, or just in workshop, right? But I'd never written a translator's note that was of any length, right? And at first, I started out with just kind of a regular essay thingy, but then partway through, I added like this like fake interview little series because it just like made sense in the context of the little essay to put a little question section. Anyways, and my advisor was like, that's the whole thing. Make it the whole thing. I was like, that's silly, but maybe. So the format just kind of happened. Yeah, just kind of arose of its own accord, sort of. And then I tweaked the rest of the essay that I had written to reflect that format. And I liked it because questions and answers are really clear. It's pretty simple as a format. One of the things I didn't want to do with the translator's note is add like further complexity, you know, to what the book already is. I wanted readers to have an outlet for if they got frustrated or like confused about something, but for it to not have to add confusion, but to just be like, well, you don't have to understand it. just listen to the sounds of the sentences. They're nice sounds, you know? I wanted to set people up to be like playful about reading this book and to just like enjoy whatever part of it they could. So that section is all me, but Deanna felt good about it. I think the sort of non-traditional thing of it like appealed to her, as far as I know. And it wasn't doing too much explaining. What it's explaining really is my process, right? What I'm trying to do in that section is just be like, here is how I got here and how you also might too get here.
I think it does a great job at
Thank you.
setting us in. I don't know. It's like you manage to capture the tone and the playfulness of the text, like you say, so well. I don't know. It's so interesting how so many of the things that you've described so far just happen because of your like dedication to this and just like it seems like it's out of love, at least out of just like your general curiosity for this text, the author, the way it works. I don't know. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I love it. That's true. Like I was saying, I think things just work better if you care about it, you know? I think it just works better if you care about it a lot.
Absolutely.
In FAQ, you write that the book means lots of things, probably, that it asks you to help make the meaning more than many books do, that it's about language acquisition and motherhood. What do you most hope people take away from reading such a book?
Yeah, I really want people to like, I really hope people can leave feeling like a little bit less scared, you know, of something like it, but also more like, I don't know, excited and curious and I maybe weirded out. Sure, like a little weirded out, you know, a little bit like what just happened? What am I supposed to be what's going on, you know? But in a joyful sense for the most part. I think. I love that this book, one of the things that it does for me is just really radically ask me to reorient myself to the language that it's using, the words that it's using, the images that it's using. It just takes away most senses of familiarity for a whole sentence and then gives you like a little bit of familiarity briefly to just like keep you going and to like give you just like something to go on and then it's back to just like being in the middle of a hurricane. Yeah. So I hope some of that. I hope people get some of that, you know.
That makes a lot of sense. Since we bring up the opening section, let's move to the final section where you have a glossary. And I'm curious to know if that section was meant to explain or further complicate.
I don't think anything in this book is meant to explain anything about anything to anybody. At first I was like, oh, this is going to unlock the whole book for me. This is going to make so much sense now. And the answer is no. I think for me, it's one of my favorite poems of the book, I think. And I would call it a poem. It has a really straightforward premise. It is an ABC poem. And it's in this sort of kind of dictionary format, or at least that's what I read it as, right? It's like word and then definition. But every single one is just totally off the wall, out of left field, very confusing, does not really explain things, but does interestingly offer like connections between ideas and between words that actually do come up throughout the book a little bit. Let me see if I can find an example of this. I don't know if I'll be able to. But I think some of them behave not like definitions, but like relationships. And like relationships both to the word in question, but also to the other words under that letter and to the previous line. Yeah. Uh, blue, everything unseen. That's like that's in the beginning of this poem, towards the beginning of this poem. And blue as a color comes up all the time in the book. And is always kind of, for me, it's always kind of pointing at like the real world, right? And like the simple reality of like things you can touch and see and look at, and that in contrast with language and how language deals with the stuff around us in the material sense. So in that way, I think it acts as kind of a like like a little bit of a guide, right? A little bit of a this is related to this in some type of way, but maybe just not in the way you're expecting based on the format that it's in, but it ties them to one another in ways that I think are not random and are useful.
Since you bring up blue, there's lots of colors in the book, which was one aspect I really enjoyed. Can you
Yeah.
tell me how color functions in the book and how does translating color work? Are there any colors that don't translate?
I definitely struggled with a few of them sometimes. Shades of blue specifically, I think. Color comes up constantly. And they're often really primary colors, red, blue, yellow, all the time, constantly. And I'm trying to think exactly how to phrase this. I feel like because this is such an image bombardment of a book, you're just being hit with images constantly, all the time, constantly. Having like colors come up a lot of the time is sort of like almost like a pacer, almost like a way to punctuate or to remember. Like I have certain images in the book associated really tightly with a color, and they stick in my mind a little bit better because it's noted that they're like this bright color or whatever. Um, so maybe that's part of it. Yeah, but I think maybe it's also just a function of like probably 90% of this book is images, right? So color is just like a function of that. Color comes up all the time. I really like that it's a bunch of primary colors. I imagine them really like saturated, and just like kids' toys colors, which feels right thematically also, right? Because this is about language learning and like being that age where you're trying to figure out how to make words with your mouth and also playing with plastic toys that are red and yellow and blue. Yeah, I guess maybe I don't totally understand it myself. And I did my best with the shades to be specific about them in English, but most of it seems just like pretty straightforward: red, yellow, blue, green, magenta, right? Like that comes up. And it moves mysteriously. I don't fully understand it myself.
Do you have anything to contribute, Joaquin, to that? Because I feel like I've heard you talk about colors that don't translate before.
Particularly, I think I can only think of Celeste,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but yeah, yeah. I mean, in English, it's just a shade of blue rather than its own color. But I don't know. Color, maybe Spanish and English isn't the best example of this, but there are different cultures that put like weight to, like the symbolism behind colors can be different region to region. Although I don't think and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it affected your project in a way like that, right? Um,
Not that I'm aware of.
yeah. Like I think there's a country where red is like one of the binary colors. Like for a lot of Western countries, it's like white and black, and I don't know, just a lot of countries in general. But I can't remember what place in it was like red and black.
I think ancient Greece may have been, or was
Yeah,
red and blue. I'm not sure.
I
Yeah,
can't remember, but
yeah,
that's the kind of stuff that changes. So like, what does white mean? Why do we wear black to a funeral? Why do we wear
yeah,
white to a funeral?
yeah.
Um, more of a cultural thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think it comes up more often, yeah, between languages that aren't Spanish and English.
yeah.
It's like, but yeah, there Celeste, yeah, is definitely in there, and I would remember struggling with that one a little bit.
There were I'm trying to remember this particular instance. I think it's one of the later poems. The poem is doing a lot of wordplay and like repetition of sound and stuff. And there's the translation of like it was verde or something, or like green in Spanish with something else that started with a V, and you managed to make like green into viridian, which is like I'm sure there's instances where like you have to change sounds for, with form and playing with that and like how to make it all match. For this particular project, it must have been really crazy. I don't know if you felt that way. Maybe it was easier than, or there's also like in the glossary or the Abecedarian, you also have like blood, and you change it to sanguine or something. Like sangre into sanguine
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
um, trying to find those like Latin
yeah, yeah.
similarities. I don't know. It's fascinating, all the stuff you've done.
Those parts are so much fun.
Yeah.
They're like little puzzles. Uh, I would make lists of them, of parts where I would be like, this is a word that's going to be a problem for this or this reason.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I would get to just like fiddle with it, until I came up with something. Or I would bring it to workshop and be like, I'm stumped. Somebody help me. And then you, Joaquin, or one of y'all would have just like a genius idea that would solve the problem. Right?
Your submissions generated the most fascinating discussions about sound and everything. I
Yep.
don't know. I always felt very pumped coming into a workshop where you were being workshopped, because it was just like, today we're going to get to talk just about how creative we can get with wordplay and, and stuff. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about boxes. Both in the title, but also each section serves as a box in its own right. Why boxes? What is the implication there?
So you would have to ask Deanna this, I think, to actually understand a real answer, but I don't know if she'd tell you, because that's the kind of person she is, which I approve of. Um, I When I think about it, and when I was translating it, I was thinking about the sort of tactile experience of like touching and opening a box, of like boxes as a form of containment, and as something really, really like in the physical world. And I was thinking about this in part because like thematically throughout the book, that's really, really present, right? Thinking about objects in the world and how to talk about them, how to name them, how to describe them. But I was also thinking about it because Deanna is also a visual artist and like makes things with her hands, like does paintings or mixed media things or videos, or I mean, she's like very talented and she does like a bazillion different things. So I was trying to think about it in the context of like almost like an artist studio, maybe, right? Like let's look in this box and poke around and see what's in here and make something out of it. And that may not be what it was at all. that may be totally incorrect, but but when I was translating it, that's what I was thinking about. It's just like very, very tactile, very in the world. Like how can we engage this as closely as tightly as possible with stuff that's actually in front of you? How can we make language fit as tightly as possible?
I think that has a lot to say with like, you started this question or this answer by saying you'd probably have to ask Diana, but as the translator, you had to like use your interpretation of these boxes. Like it influenced your method of translating, like your interpretation influenced your method of translating. And there's a lot to be said like about what translating is, what translation is, and like how you can never fully have a translation that's like still 100% the work of the original author. You know, there's still that like Cal component to this translation that the way you saw these boxes, the way you focused on the material, physicalness and textures and stuff, like it definitely still made the work in English what it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like as much as I would like to just get out of the way, there is there's a certain amount of that that you can't do if you're going to translate it well. If you're
Yeah.
going to make something that's like internally coherent that is in English mostly, you know, like there's a certain amount of my imagination that has to go into any time I put together an image, specifically one of hers. Um, yeah.
Speaking of translation, there are some really striking moments where the speaker mentions a translator. And I wondered if those were odd moments for you to translate as the translator.
Definitely. Yeah. I remember getting to them and being like, wait, I thought she told me that she didn't think anybody would translate these, you know? And I mean, she like, in some ways, she had a similar experience to me with people being like, these aren't poems, you know? Like people really not not getting them and not wanting to get them, not trying very hard to pay attention to them. So she was, I mean, she was really, really excited when I said I wanted to translate them, and but she had not thought about that as a possibility at all. She was so surprised that I had approached her about it. Um, so I think I think the project is interested in language and like the transfer of meaning, whatever we want to call that, right? So I remember getting to that poem in the book and being like, oh, wait. How do we, is that really what that means there? And she was like, yeah, that's what that means. So yeah,
Do you have a favorite poem in the book?
I don't think so. I have I have maybe a favorite section, I think, or a section that I feel the most tenderly towards, like the second to last section before the dictionary poem, with all the kind of prose chunks followed by a line. Yeah, I feel very particular to that section. I love that it has a sort of form. It's not like perfectly consistent throughout, but it has a pretty consistent form and plays with it and experiments with it and manages to like really tug on my heartstrings somehow while doing this like very out there weird thing. It's a section of the book that where the I think of him as a character where the kiddo, you know, is kind of what I've taken to calling him. I mean, he has a name, but yeah. Where the kid that's in the book is like very present in almost every poem. And the sort of back and forth between the speaker and this kid comes up a lot. And that just feels like really strong and poignant and strange in the best ways, to me. Yeah.
Is it the kid that says, I have to say the names of all the dinosaurs that are still dreaming of me? Oh my gosh, such a good
Yeah.
line.
Yeah, it's a good poem.
There's so many lines like that where I had to stop and scream. I'm just like, oh my gosh. Can you give our viewers a writing prompt?
Yes, yes, I can. I even wrote this down ahead of time because I knew it would be a struggle to come up with it on the spot. Okay, so kind of based on this book, pick a verb that you like, that you're interested in, and then separately pick an image of something that you like, that you're interested in. Um, and find like unexpected ways to combine these things, right? So sort of towards the beginning of the book, there's this line, they stockpile light pink baby sweaters. And then immediately following that, we lock the cherry trees. And those are like, what? Right? But they do interesting things if you stick with them and play with them and think about them in your head. And what I notice about them and about a lot of the images in this book is that there's a really active verb, but one that doesn't usually get paired with that image. So pick a verb, pick an image, try to put them together in interesting ways. Do that like 5 more times, right? To make sure you can hit a good one. And then see if you can make a poem out of it. That's my thought.
I love that. I'm excited to try it.
Yeah, that sounds really, really cool. I already have like so many ideas of what I want to do with that. I love that.
Cool. Good.
Okay, we don't have much time left, but I want to make sure we leave enough time for audience questions. Aurelie asked, does Cal have a favorite word in each language they've translated in?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I don't know what is with this one, but espinacas in Spanish is like my favorite. It's just spinach. It's nothing terribly. I just love saying it. Espinaca. It makes me happy. I don't know.
Oh my God.
And,
I love that.
And I mean, this is everybody's favorite word in Portuguese, but saudade, I love that word. It's a good word. It's kind of untranslatable in English. The closest thing is like longing. And then I was trying to think for Old and Middle Irish. There's all these words that refer to like women and their different roles, and I've been thinking a lot about keens, and the word banshee in English comes from an Old Irish term for women who would keen for the dead. So banshee. So I like that one a lot.
It's really cool.
It's a good question.
Were there any questions that you read that you were like, I can't wait to answer this, that I didn't get to?
I mean, I love shouting out everybody who inspires me, but that would just be a really long list. That I could go on and on and on and on and on about. How do I read a work like this out loud? That's a question that I really liked. Because these poems care so much about sound, when I'm reading them out loud, I focus on that and try to like exaggerate some of the rhythmic bits and pieces and the assonance and consonants. And yeah, just like make the sonic component a sort of emotional experience. Yeah, and to read them playfully and try to let them like hold the humor that I know is in there, but that is sometimes hard to access if you don't have the time to sit with it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Cal. This was amazing. I feel like I learned so much about translation and about this project, and loved it all.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much. I love getting to answer questions about this book, so this was perfect. This was great.
When did you say your book is coming out? This translation?
December, early
Nice.
December. It's very exciting.
Can someone find you at Alta to get your signature?
Yes, they can. Yes, they can.
Nice.
I would love that. I will also be reading, or not reading, I will be declaiming
Whoa,
at Declamación, one of the poems from this book. So if you want
nice.
to come,
Very cool.
Can't
working
wait
on
to see it.
memorizing it right now.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. And then, wow, thank you. This is fabulous.
Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, sounds good. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. This is not my call. How do I leave?